A welcome from all of us here at Loughborough University. This is a bit unusual, and normally the commercial break comes in the middle of the program, but here it is at the beginning. So we thank our sponsors, the Centre for Research in Culture and Communication, and especially DARG, Discourse and Rhetoric Group at Loughborough University. We're absolutely delighted to have Professor Anita Pomerantz come and give us and everybody a talk. Those who've come late will not have heard how many people are attending this. It's quite an extraordinary achievement from all over the world. Some people have either stayed up extremely late or got up extremely early, and a special thanks to them. For those of us lucky enough to be in the middle of the day or in the afternoon, it's a pleasure, which we can devote full attention to. But if somebody has to nip off because they're just getting too tired or because the day has only just started, then do feel that you can do so. But the rest of us, we're going to very much enjoy the talk. There'll be about 40 minutes talk, Anita, and at about 5 minutes from the end, I'll come in and give you just a heads up that we're coming to the end of your time. And after that, then Liz Stoko, my colleague, will take over for the Q&A, and she'll see people's questions and field them from the chat. So if you have questions as we come to the end of Anita's talk, then do put them in the chat, and Liz Stoko will collate them and do the emceeing of that part. So now over to you, Saul.
Okay, well, I am then unexpectedly but very honoured to introduce our speaker, Professor Anita Pomerantz. I think she probably doesn't need that much introduction, but I will say a few words. She's Professor Emerita in the Department of Communication at State University of New York at Albany, and her conversation analytic work on agreeing and disagreeing, seeking and providing information and negotiating responsibility for blameworthy and praiseworthy deeds has been really foundational for the field, and I'm sure we've all read it and absorbed it. And it's opened up all kinds of areas of basic conversation analytic work and shaped this rich field of applied CA work, including her own in medical and legal contexts. She served as the chair of the Language and Social Interaction divisions of both the National Communication Association and the International Communication Association. And she's going to talk to us today, reflecting a little on a recently completed book with the Oxford University Press entitled Asking and Telling in Conversation. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to that tremendously. So I will now hand over to you, Anita. Thank you again very much. And everybody, I hope you enjoy.
Did you give me control yet?
You are now the host, Anita. You can do anything. You could end the meeting. You could kick people out selectively, or you could share your screen. Great.
Okay, there's something in the way, so I cannot, oh, there we go. How does that look? Are we started?
That looks great. Let's go.
Okay, before we actually move on, I want to very much thank Charles, Liz, and Saul, you for organizing this and inviting me. It is a genuine pleasure to be here. So when we were talking about doing this, there were two choices for the presentation. One choice was essentially to talk about what I know about asking and telling activities from my papers and sort of maybe preview the book or something. And then the second idea was to talk about some of my reactions and current feelings and concerns about papers I've written, and probably the more popular papers that are in the book, and what I take away from them. And happily, that was my choice, and it was the organizer's preference too. So that's what we're doing today. It's in some ways more personal than this is what the world is like, this is what our work is like, though you will get my current inclinations as well. So what's in today's presentation? I picked excuse me, I picked 3 papers, extreme case formulations, telling my side, and agreeing, disagreeing, the preference paper, in that order. And for each one, I wasn't sure that everyone would be that familiar with each one. So I have, when I start talking about it, I will give a brief overview of the main contributions. And then I talk about issues, either that bother me personally or that because of the way those papers have been treated, I have issues I'd like to clarify. And then in the same discussion for each paper, I do some kind of wrap up with, here's a couple things I take away from it. And following that, I'm going to end with just one kind of place where I'm at with respect to the shape of projects or papers and what my own current preference is. So why don't we start with extreme case formulations as a way of legitimizing claims? That's at least the title of it. And I have the overview, which I've marked as part 1. And I mark it as part 1 because as I wrote the paper, there were more than one use. There were several uses of extreme case formulations. So the first one is the primary use that I talked about, which is reflected in the title as well. When speakers anticipate challenges to their claims or skepticism about their claims, they may use extreme case formulations to strengthen and legitimize those claims. And so just to give you a couple examples, the claim that A is making, the context is A received a phone call from someone she doesn't know who is identified as someone her husband knows. So it's somebody calling for her husband, and she's complaining about her husband's very bad treatment of her. So it's a complaint about how badly he treated her. So when he went away on Mother's Day, and he went away on Saturday evening of Mother's Day, he spent the night with her and all day Sunday. Well, how bad was the treatment? A skeptical hearing of it is, okay, so he went away on Mother's Day for a while. What's being built here is it was a big deal. He went away the night before, he was away all day Sunday. So building it as a very big deal looks like it's anticipating hearings that are more skeptical or possibly skeptical. Likewise, here C was selling fruitcakes for an organization, and the mandate, the charge was to sell whole fruitcakes for $3.25. Well, her claim in line 1, in the first line, is that what she had to do, not wanted to do, but she was forced to do, what she had to do was sell halves of them. And she's building it as having to do it because, first of all, she only did it for a few people, not everyone, but because every time I say $3.25, they look at me like you must be nuts, woman. So it's really building the claim to support, building what would be evidence for the claim she wants to make, which is she didn't want to do this. She did it because she had to. Oh, wrong button. Let's get rid of that button. Oh no. So this primary use that I'm talking about, extreme case formulations, are used to counter possible skeptical versions of a speaker's claim. But now in the paper, there's 2 other uses that I talk about that were thrown in there. One of them is that when people make delicate assessments, one of the ways to deal with that so that the person making the assessment is not accountable is to say everyone reacted the same way. And it implies that you is not your assessment, clearly not your assessment alone, and it's probably valid because everybody made the same assessment. So one example was where C, who was telling his wife about a co-manager who he has complained about in the past, history of difficulty. We got so much done, more than that, but everyone had this feeling that we were accomplishing things. You know, we all felt real progress going on. It's just so amazing. Whenever he's around, he's utterly disparaging of our efforts. So it is almost a group reaction here. It is not C's reaction that C is accountable for. And the last example here is a little bit different. S is telling A about a friend and projecting, you'd like him. So this is a projection of what A would like, but follows it up with everybody who meets him likes him. So he's a likable guy. I'm not saying anything about you personally and your preferences or what I'm expecting of you. So this business of everyone reacts or reacted the same way does a really interesting job about the opinions or assessments you're putting forward. Now, there's also a third use that I put in this paper, and that had to do with not everyone feels the same way, but everyone does it. And I'm arguing that this is a different use too. And it has to do with when an account is called for, how do you get in a position of not offering an account? And here's an example where T was charged with accepting bribes, and D is using this kind of practice to argue that T should not be treated any differently than anyone else. He's not specially accountable. The conduct was not abnormal. So you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything else, anything wrong other than what everybody else on the police force did at the time. At Christmas time, we accepted. Oh man, Christmas time, it was like, I remember the days. Christmas time used to be like, damn right. Christmas time, everybody accepted money. So we have here an argument that he just did what everyone did. What is the business of holding him specially accountable? A speaker implies that no account is needed by claiming that, I guess I should go back, everyone does it, everybody does it. What do we take from this paper? What are some lessons learned? Well, first of all, those three different uses actually are done in different contexts. So by taking into account the context in which the extreme case formulation is produced, we appreciate the issues operating in that slot and then can talk about the practices that are tied to those issues. So as I said in the first one, here we have something like skepticism or court cases with challenges. And in that context, where you would expect a challenge or a skepticism, that's when we need a device to counter them. And a device to counter that, the challenges and skepticism then would be we would use the actual device is countering the challenges, but the way we do it is with extreme case formulations. Likewise, in a context where we are making assessments for which we would be accountable, they're delicate assessments, and we might want to be less accountable, we have a way of dealing with that. And that particular way is everyone reacts that way. And finally, again, speaking about context, here an account is expected. And so I'm opting not to give one. What are my options here? I know you want an account, you've asked for an account. Everyone does it, is a way to deal with that context. So that's the first lesson, and that's a lesson I will be returning to as a theme anyway. The second lesson is that it has to do with how we conceptualize projects. And I conceptualized it in terms of extreme case formulations. And that resulted in I had different uses. I found them in my collection. I found them. Well, what am I going to do with them since the paper's on extreme case formulations? So I solved it by making different sections. So I'm suggesting that if I were to do it again, I would pick a primary function, let's say countering challenges and possible skeptical hearings, and develop that. Now, if I were going to develop that, I'm no longer making different uses of extreme case formulations. Now the comparison is in the context of dealing with challenges and skeptical hearings, what are my options? So that would be where that kind of paper would go. A different project is built around a different circumstance, and take the other circumstance, the last circumstance of an account is being called for. And now we need a device to negate that account. And one such device is everyone does it. Sachs wrote about it. And I had the quote in, I didn't want to take the time. I had the transcript in, but I just want to say what he wrote about it. Where persons are engaged in trying to get an account from somebody, there's an object that the person who's being questioned can slip in. And what it does is it cuts off the basis for the search for an account. Now then he says, I don't have a terribly elegant name for it. What I called it was account apparently appropriate. And then something that I'm not sure how he pronounced it, but it means negate the appropriateness of it, negativer or something like that. But he shorthanded it as A3N. So 2 points about that. One point is having named this and thought about it in terms of the device, in terms of the interactional function, which is to make an account not needed anymore. He then went on to discuss in his lecture, what else do we have that works that way? And he came up with, I think it probably was biographical. He'd walk in a neighborhood at a time of night where if the police saw you, they would stop you and ask what you were doing. It's an accountable action to be in some neighborhoods at some time of night. And he said, what would work in this way? Well, he said, all you have to do is get a dog to be with you. They will not ask you for an account at that point. But then he went on to say, this kind of an account, which is everyone does it, is the kind of account which is it's general. You can use it across many, many situations. Whereas taking a dog with you is a very specific negator of an account. I mean, it's specific, situational and specific. The other thing I want to point out about this is that when he named the device, he named it to capture the function served, not the discourse that was used to carry out the function. So, and I started to think about that as well. And I thought, okay, Sachs had studied yes/no questions that, are you an engineer? No, I'm a mechanic. And he didn't call them yes/no questions. He called the device correction invitation device, which invites a correction. So again, he named the device according to the function. And I'm bothering to say this because sometimes we kind of get a little bit mushy in our thinking about how to think about what we're looking at and where our primary focus will be. So we finished the first paper, we'll move to the second. Second paper is Telling My Side Limited Access as a Phishing Device. And again, we want to do an overview of it. And the biggest overview is I analyzed a device for indirectly seeking information. And it's done. The indirectness of it is that you don't ask for the information, you give a report, and the report is structured so as to invite or prompt a recipient to provide just that information that's being sought. But I have two different versions of what the structure of the report should be. The first version is, it's a my side version, my side telling. I tell my side, you have a counterpart to it, and you get to tell your side. I'm inviting you to tell your side. When people talk about or use this paper in their own work, they always use that version, that it is telling my side as the way this thing works. But as you could see in the title of the paper, there was another version to it, which is give a limited access or outsider's perspective report to a recipient who has firsthand knowledge of that which you have referred to. Okay, that's a different version of how this should be structured. And just to finish the overview, at the end of the paper, I also describe circumstances in which people fish for information rather than either directly ask or say nothing. Now I want to talk about, excuse me, let me. Some confusion that I've encountered about the description of the report. And as I have just said, there were two possible descriptions, telling my side and limited access report, and that it's almost always referred to as a my side telling, because that's, I think, the first part of the title. But I want to talk about the ambiguity and confusion that has arisen about this. And it has to be two kinds of things about the scope of it. The first one has to do with, okay, let's say this is a device, which I thought it is, for seeking information. Does it tell you how that information seeking is being done, with what kind of report? I would argue, and I have evidence for it, the first kind, which is, now this is going to be a my side, your side, because that's the way I set up telling my side. My side is, I report, your line's been busy, and you say, yeah, my father's wife called me, and you're telling me now why the lines have been busy. I have a side of an event, and here's your side. But it's been interpreted in terms of information seeking practices in a broader way, so that, oh, I did it again. Maybe it'll just go away. So this other thing that we use quite often, I'm in the neighborhood, I say, hi, I've seen this person all the time. Hi, my name's Anita, and I do expect back, hi, I'm Bob. So, and this came from Sachs's very early work. This is Mr. Smith. May I help you? Yes, this is Mr. Brown. We can give certain information, my side of it, expecting you to give your side of just that information, your counterpart event, your counterpart information. This is information seeking. It isn't what I was writing about, but it's perfectly reasonable that people have seen telling my side in a broader way. So that's the first bit of confusion, where you're looking for information seeking, and there's a bunch of ways of doing it, a bunch of practices, but I wasn't really thinking of all those practices. So I'm going to leave my mouse somewhere else so I can just do the keyboard. Now that was a confusion over the practice for doing information seeking. Here we have confusions about what actions are being invited. When I wrote the paper, when you read the first part of the paper, there's no question I'm talking about indirectly seeking information. This is what I wrote later in the paper. The design then of a my-side telling provides for the recipient to volunteer information, perform a service, make an offer, extend an invitation, remedy an offense, answer an accusation, and so forth, without his or her being directly being asked, requested, accused, or complained against. Now we have this my-side telling, which is doing, all you have to do is do a my-side telling, and wow, it can do any of those things. Now, that's quite different from information seeking. After I read that and going over this recently, I had this oh no moment where I realized a few years earlier, quite a few years earlier, I had reviewed a paper and I had criticized the paper for treating my-side tellings as broader than just doing information seeking. So this is my occasion to apologize to those authors, whoever you might have been, for, I don't know that I rejected or asked for revision, but clearly there's a warrant for treating my-side tellings much more broadly than I remembered. I swore I knew what that paper was about. There's another quote which is important to me on the same page. When a conversant tells my side, the import of the telling, the concerns motivating, and its treatment are for the recipient to determine. That's probably true for a my side telling. However, what is that? It makes it into a black box analytically. It's a mystery as to how those determinations are made. So there's a little bit of a problem there from my point of view. I'm sorry. I'm arguing that a limited access report is more descriptive of how this information strategy works. And following Sachs's little way of naming things, I would describe it as an insider's version invitation practice. The speaker anticipates that the recipient does not simply have a different version, my side, your side, but has firsthand knowledge about that which is referred to in the report. The speaker relies on the recipient's inferring that this, I'm sorry, I know it must be terrible to listen to. The speaker relies on the recipient's inferring that the speaker's giving the limited access report may indicate the speaker's interest in hearing more about it. So just to kind of bring that home, I rang you earlier, but you were out. Your being out is clearly a limited access report on your activities. Being out is not saying what you were doing, where you were at. Oh, I must have been at Des's mom's. And I'm arguing not only is it an outsides version, but going back to why that now, Ida has to figure out, okay, you're telling me you're interested in that. You gave me a version that doesn't say, that says you don't know something. Let me fill it in, the mystery. So my side tellings is a gloss for different kinds of reports, but it lacks a descriptive power regarding the kind of telling being offered and the response being invited. What are the lessons learned here? One lesson is that now we're talking about the conduct versus the function. And right now I'm talking about the report, the conduct, the thing that makes it work. So there may be different ways of identifying or characterizing the form of conduct that's used to do a job. And it's worth sometimes having some thoughts about it. Have you played with alternatives? Is one broader than the other? Is one more informative than the other? So we talked about my side inviting a counterpart, your side, and I've argued that it's broad and inclusive, whereas a limited access or outsiders report inviting a firsthand knowledge report of the matter at hand seems to be better fitted to really what I was trying to get at. That was the first lesson. The second lesson is how very easy it is to rush to judgment without really closely examining each instance in its context to decide whether, in fact, it belongs in the group that you are trying to talk about. Now, this one I used as the first example in the paper. Wow, this is going to convince people because you have the first one, which is fishing for information. Did you see me pull up? No, I was trying you all day. The line was busy like for hours. So it looks like my side telling or either my side telling or limited access. Your line was busy for hours. And then a little bit later, who are you talking to? Okay, so we have the direct question. And it seemed like if somebody wanted to be convinced that one was indirect and the indirect one was really going for information, what about this example? Well, if you look at it in context more closely, did you see me pull up is clearly it is asking, it's offering an account for the timing of the call. No, I was trying you all day and the line was busy like for hours. So we get, first of all, a disconfirmation and then an alternative account. Now, how does it's being done that way? It's not being done as, oh, I call it in its own environment, like a little report in its own turn. Early on in the call, I tried to call you, but you were out. Now, this is really a different object. And in fact, it's being treated as a different object because in reporting, I was trying you all day. That itself is an accountable event. Well, why were you trying? What were you calling for? What? And now G comes back with, well, I'm going to come over in a little while. Oh, you were calling because I said I would help your brother. So on closer examination, it wasn't that at all, but it was so easy to jump to that conclusion. And so it's, for me, a lesson learned. Let's be a little bit more cautious before we find just the perfect example. So the third lesson is an obvious one. When you're an author of a paper, don't assume you know what you've written, especially after many years. Now we turn to agreeing, disagreeing. And I'm going to have two parts to the overview because the first part of the paper was about some features of assessments. And I want to spend a bit of, I want to not forget that because it's a preferred, dispreferred turn shapes and preference organization that really has gotten attention. I have argued, would argue, and feel assessments are both prevalent and central in social life. They're understood as products of experience. That's non-trivial from my point of view, because we do things and there's an expectation that we have reactions to that. Now, I'm talking about reactions. It's a different name than an assessment, but it's one that fits reactions to experience. We also not only have the experience, but when we tell about the experience, telling about it means that we're also going to tell what we made of it, an assessment there. So they're really quite fundamental to living in the world. Now, unless under part of that argument is unless otherwise indicated, they're assumed to be based on firsthand knowledge of the referent. I go into that quite a bit because it's tied to the rest of the paper a lot. But along with that, a common way to decline to assess is to claim little or no knowledge of the referent. Identifiable environments in which assessments are expected and offered. And finally, assessments are used to share experience, calibrate views, demonstrate understandings, and in short, from my point of view, are fundamental in this process of establishing intersubjectivity. I mean, it's for me that fundamental. But as I said, that wasn't what the paper was about, and putting it as a lead-in to the rest of the paper meant it wouldn't be addressed in the same way. So let's turn to the second thing, preferred, dispreferred actions and their turn shapes. This part of it is different from the practices I just talked about up until now. Extreme case formulations was a practice, were used for the practice of strengthening and legitimizing claims in the face of opposition. Offering a limited access report is used for the practice of inviting an insider's version. Now, those two are practices. In contrast, this is about a real different kind of organization. Overall, there's distinctive ways responses to assessments are produced and interpreted, and it's how do we think about what might be responsible for those different ways of producing and interpreting assessments. So I'm not going to detail what a preferred action turn shape or a dispreferred action turn shape looks like. You can see there that there's some differences right off. Now, those turn shapes led me to identify an action, the action being performed, as preferred or dispreferred. That's how I came to identify the action as preferred or dispreferred. The turn shape, though, is a consequence of something else. And we often talk about it, the consequence of how participants orient to the actions in their context. So the question is, what is this preference business? And I'm raising it because of the way I think it's been treated. Now, if we consider, this little sequence.
Anita, just 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. If we consider, I'm so dumb I don't even know it, and W says, no, you're not dumb. Most of us would say, oh, okay. Here we have disagreement as preferred. It looks preferred. And it's based on the way W disagrees. And we say disagreement's a preferred action. However, labeling it preferred, labeling it disagreement as preferred tells us only that it was produced in a preferred action turn shape. So the label is not an explanation. I'm saying this because I hear it as an explanation given. So if we think about it, what would an explanation be? Well, it has to do with shared orientations. It could be rights and obligations, maybe associated with role and relationship categories, principles, maxims, culturally shared solutions to problems. Here are some possibilities that I put down. Disagreeing could be oriented to as an alternative to agreeing, which would be tantamount to criticizing. It could be oriented to as inviting, as a sociable cooperative action. It could be oriented to as a possible terminator. I don't want to get into this. How do I close it down? Whatever you're going to argue, you need to present your best evidence for it. You can't just, hey, I think it must be this. Now, moving on very quickly, what are assessments anyway? I lacked clarity as to whether it's an action, discursive form, or both. On the one hand, I think I treated it as a sequence of actions when I focused on first and second assessments. They're sequences of actions. Now, yet, it wasn't good enough. I needed to look at the actions being done. And I said agreeing, disagreeing was being done. And I also needed to look at the initial assessments. I'm not going to go through this slide except to say that what the initial assessment does is to set up its own issues in responding. So each chapter dealt with different issues in responding. So they're relevant. How you get different issues depends upon the sequence of actions. Now, going back to this tension, when I collected instances, I treated assessments as forms of utterance. Now, this is what I wasn't fully thinking about. I searched for evaluative terms, mostly adjectives, some verbs. It's there in the discourse. And yet, when I went to analyze them, I wrote, in proffering an initial assessment, the speaker formulates the assessment so as to accomplish an action or multiple actions, praise, complain, compliments, insult, brag, self-deprecate. In the next turn, we get agree, disagree. I'm talking actions there. So what happened? I mean, it's only recently that I really fully grasped. I was using assessment as a discursive form, not an action. I mean, certainly not an activity of doing assessing or evaluating or judging. And I don't know if I'm the only one vague in this matter, but it was worth going through. I'm almost through. Contextual matters bear on participants' orientations to the actions, and there's a bunch of possibilities there. I'm not minimizing any of them. An action may be oriented to as supportive, unsupportive, invited, uninvited, etc., depending upon all those things. I mean, that's what we're talking about. But, you know, I've argued here context, 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 but that's only because I think my work was a little bit more balanced on the identify structures side, organization side, and really disattended some aspects of context. So at the end of the day, we absolutely want to identify structures, organizations, practices that are used across contexts. We have resources we bring to situations while still appreciating the contextual matters that shape concerns, relevancies, understandings that are in play. It's that balancing. It's really a tricky matter. So last comment, last slide. Here's my personal preference. Some projects are built around some bit of conduct, verbal or bodily, and then you explicate the functions or uses of it. And I used extreme case formulation as an example of the conduct. And if I really were doing that, I'd say, well, and we're really talking about uses and functions, I would then say, well, they're used all the time in compliments too. You are absolutely the best, you know, I've never seen anyone like you. Okay, that wasn't in there because I didn't really do a paper on all the uses of extreme case formulations. It is a way to go, or some uses. But the other projects are built around an interactional function or use, and then they show how that bit of conduct, how some bit of conduct works to accomplish it. And then maybe describe other ways to accomplish that function. And I just use that as an example. Instead of extreme case formulation, what if I wanted to look at this way of countering skepticism and perhaps other ways as well? So both kinds of projects can be very informative, but the reason that I am at this point favoring a function, a use approach, is because I think it's better aligned with the way we interact. People interact by dealing with it here and now. They act in response to issues and problems that they face and or anticipate down the road. And so focusing on the interactional functions, I think, is better suited to a moment-to-moment, to our moment-to-moment way of dealing with the contingencies of interaction. And I have gotten through it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anita. That was just absolutely wonderful. We've got some questions, and what I'd like people to do is I'll just call out your name and you can read your own question. So Jan Svenevig is first. Jan, are you there? Do you have
I'm here.
Great, go for it.
Norway calling. Hi, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. My question is about the term itself, extreme case formulation. I'm wondering whether you're happy with that for the case of the cases you presented here, because in all these instances, it's more about generalizing from a single instance to the whole class of instances, from one phenomena to the whole class of phenomena. So I was wondering, isn't this more a case of generalization than radicalization or extreme formulation?
I'm not sure I'm going to be answering you, but I think when I think about extreme case formulation, I was thinking mostly of attributes. So an attribute is pushed to the extreme. Instead of day, it's all day. Instead of new, it's brand new. Now that one seemed to be a good example of an extreme case, but certainly I think in something I've written, I said, everybody does it. It doesn't fit extreme case. It's a bad name for it. And I think maybe in my comment to the book, in the book or somewhere, I said that one should be called entire class. So I am very open to thinking about, well, wait, I called it extreme class. I have other things in there. Some of them may be, some of them may not be. Do they work the same way or not? Now, I don't know if I answered exactly what you're getting at.
Yes,
but,
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is from Paul Denbier. Are you there, Paul?
Hi, Anita.
Oh, hi, Paul.
Yeah, I kind of thought that maybe the questions would just come or go, but I'll try and articulate it. I was interested kind of in what I described in the chat as the casual hyperbole of everyone and every time. I kind of wondered, like, does it work well? I was like reminded of arguments with friends when you try to do these things. And it seems to me it's like low hanging fruit to contest the applicability of the everyone and everything. So you can say things like, well, I mean, every time, everybody, you know, it's like a debate I would have with friends. And so it just got me thinking about that reaction. It seems like it's a tempting thing, but then it occurred to me that maybe if you're trying to avoid giving an account, better to have a debate about the applicability of casual hyperbole than ever get to the account. And so anyway, so what I was getting at though is like the fruitcake salesperson knows what's happening when they're selling the fruitcakes, but the recipient maybe doesn't know. So the question had to do with some kind of epistemic access or expertise or knowledge. Does it let you get away with extreme case formulations? Whereas if you have two people who have equal states of knowledge, they can contest whether the everyone or every time is in fact like exculpatory in this moment.
Will someone help me with the citation of the paper, I think out of Loughborough, written on extreme case, at least at that time, written on extreme case formulations?
Yeah, it's Derek Edwards's paper in Rolsey. I think that's the one you mean. Derek Edwards's paper in Charles's journal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, their argument is that you would, I mean, I may be messing up their argument, but you would think that these would be more vulnerable. And what is so surprising is that they're not challenged. Now that doesn't answer all of what you were saying, but it's really an interesting point as to how they're understood and understood and what they're about, and whether going after them is something interactionally we do. So I invite you to actually read that paper. It's really interesting.
I've just put the reference in the chat if anyone wants to go and look at that.
Oh,
paper.
great.
Yeah. And the next question is from Daniela Rathely. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. You there, Daniela?
Yeah, hi.
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 Wow, I would have never had the courage to ask a question on this platform if I wasn't like absolutely excited about the fact that you're speaking about assessments, because as I'm writing about them now, I've been struggling so much with what they are and what they do and why people do them. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about them. So in your talk, you were mentioning that you are focusing more on the function of devices rather than the discourse that is used to accomplish them, if I understood correctly. And I was wondering if you could discuss more the detail about what assessments are used to accomplish. So you said that in overall they're used to accomplish intersubjectivity, but can you describe more their use as a device, if they are a device, and just maybe just speak a little bit more about them? Anything that you say will be valuable. Thank you.
Let me answer in two ways. First of all, you didn't see anything on the slides with intersubjectivity. And I took it off the slide because I think that is a rather big topic to try to really do justice to. What kinds of negotiations go on and how with it, as a result of negotiations, where people end up seeing things together or not. And I was just not, I haven't done that work. So I'm leaving that as somebody else's project, maybe your project. But what people, I guess, more importantly, what people, I think you're saying, what do people do with assessments? What are they engaged in? I would never say, just look at the function without looking at the material through which that's being done. So yes, I did that because I was trying to do a different kind of balance. And I think I see people sometimes, and myself, dealing with the words or gestures as if that's the practice. So it was a corrective more than all we have to do is look at function. But I don't know if I'm answering you. It's really important to me to think of the things that we do all the time, like, wow, it's nice out. How do you want to call that? What are people doing? And just to say assessment is nowheres for me. It's not good enough. So what are people doing when they're doing that? I mean, I ask you if you want to answer.
Well, in my research, which is on child homicides, people doing assessments when they're reporting on child homicides, I've been struggling with what it is, and I think maybe it's a form of empathizing, because it definitely isn't a first-person assessment. It's not related to knowing anything about the referent, because not the people involved. So it's probably most often a form of like empathizing with the situation, or showing that you know that the situation is like requires some form of empathy. But I'm not 100% sure, which is why I'm still struggling with it.
What does it sound like? What are the words used?
This is really tragic. This is disastrous. What a awful story. What a terrible incident.
Okay, but remember I said that it's first person, it's firsthand knowledge, but except if marked otherwise, but it's also, there's a difference between that's terrible, reacting to a story or news, versus seeing something. And that becomes very clear. So that person is reacting to what is just told to them. And yes, I'm sure empathy could be going on. I mean, most broadly, it fits with, they're displaying some kind of understanding of the nature of the event or the character of the telling. So they're displaying understanding, and if that understanding involves empathy, sure. Okay, maybe we could write about it.
Really, thank you so much. I appreciate that so much.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the questions. We're just about out of time. So I just want to thank Anita again. It's been such a pleasure to hear you talk today. And I think the amount of interest and the amount of warmth, we can all feel it, even if we're all millions of miles away from each other on a Zoom. And I just wanted to say, I think it's wonderful when brilliant scholars are also brilliantly generous in their approach to scholarship. And I think doing lessons learned is itself such an excellent lesson learned. So thank you so much, Anita, and we shall all applause again and unmute for a crazy minute.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see everyone from all around the world, and for us all to keep connected in this way. So I guess what we normally do is just stay until the last person leaves. So feel free to stay until the last person leaves in the Zoom. And take care, everyone.
Bye.